buying, selling, negotiating, leading a meeting, managing a crisis. These are all the things that a lot of people are doing in their day-to-day jobs. But how do you learn those skills? I mean, sure, some from experience, but how about we learn from an ex-FBI hostage negotiator and a crisis PR consultant? Because they've written a new book. The book is called Convince Me: High Stakes Negotiation Tactics to Get Results in Any Business Situations. The co-authors, Chip Massey and Adele Gambardella, they are in Washington, D.C. today. Hello there to you both.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, I'm going to start with you, Adele. Why did you decide to come together to write this book? What did you see was missing?
Yeah, I just think, when I handled crises before I met Chip, I felt like I gave out really good and strict instructions on what to do for people. And I'm not sure they always followed it. I'm not sure they were always happy about it. I think I walked into the office after a crisis and they were like, she's here again. What did we do now? And then post Chip was much better. People were like, hey, welcome, come on in.
And is that because he's packing heat as a former FBI'er?
I don't know, Chip.
No, sir. No. What Adele commonly says, although it's not true, she did very well on her own. But what she said was that one of the difficulties is when dealing with clients is dealing with the emotional impact that a crisis has and being able to follow through on the instructions that she gives. And she does it like she knows when to do it. She knows how rapidly they need to move. But often the case was they were just kind of deer in the headlights and just wanted to hold fast to old ways and circle the wagons. So it was my job to break them out of that and to help them provide mitigation on why they're doing this now. You're not the only one that's been through a crisis. We can get you through this.
What is the number one example, Chip, you have of your time in the FBI that you believe answers any question about your credibility? You would say it was because of the day on X, Y, and Z in which I learned how to negotiate like an FBI hostage negotiator.
Oh, well, that was when the phone was handed to me when there was a fugitive on the loose and we had no idea where he was. And all we had was a phone number. And I was on the arrest team, so I wasn't acting in the capacity of a hostage negotiator. But my team leader knew I was a hostage negotiator, and she said, "Hey, Chip, you're good at talking to people at BS. Why don't you get on the line with this guy?" Right. And all I wanted to do was argue, right? Say, "Hey, look, it's not BS. It's a science. I went to a lot of training to get this right." So it turned out successful. We were able to talk him in, and the skill set that I learned worked, and that was a big confidence boost.
All right, we're going to leap into the book here. You begin like right off the top. You shatter conventional wisdom with the phrase, "Stop running on intuition." Adele, that is sacrilege. It is more than contrarian. It is completely horrifying that you wrote that. Why?
Well, one of the reasons is because 40 years of social science research says if you start with your strongest point first, no one ever believes you. You don't convince anyone of anything. And journalism school teaches us the exact opposite, right? It's the inverted pyramid. It's your strongest point first. And actually, social science teaches us if you want to convince someone, you start at a point of agreement and you move them down a continuum.
Okay. So that's very, very helpful. You've got 4 elements, Chip, of effective convincing. I'm going to summarize: timing, believability, likability, repeatability. Timing. Are you a comedian too, Chip? Like, is that also? I mean, you're also a pastor by background. What haven't you done?
Right. I know it's crazy background.
No. But see, timing, just like you know this, Bruce. I mean, that the whole idea with timing is that, and this is something that Adele uses constantly in a crisis or when dealing with difficult clients or in executive visibility and training. The whole idea is, when do you implement what you know to do? And that's something that unless you have, like you, Bruce, years of experience, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have that background. So being able to pull in like, okay, I know right now from what people are saying, the way social media is hitting, the way that I'm reading the room here and the people in it, now's the time for this, or it's pull it back. Let's reassess.
Believability is number two. I gave a total softball to Chip there to talk about, and I was talking to a fugitive. So yeah, I get it. I believe him. How do we reapply that for believability in other contexts, Adele?
I think believability is really all about, right? He's giving you the softballs. That's not fair. Believability, I think, is really so important when you are talking to anyone. And the way you can be more believable is by listening to what people are not saying. And we call that the unstated narrative, right? What do people really want you to believe about them, who they are, who they want to be in the world? And you understand that through forensic listening, which is a technique we talk about in the book. But you can be so much more believable if you listen to people on an intense and very specific level. Most people do not listen. We listen to respond. We don't listen at the level that Chip was taught at Quantico. And
the most obvious of these four things, the most people would know. Oh yeah, likable. Like that's totally important. What wouldn't we think about when we think about likability? Or is likability as simple as that? Wear a smile, ask them where they got their shoes, and compliment their hair.
Yeah, so complimenting their hair and the shoes would work for me personally, but I'm an easy target on that one. However, if you want to be really effective in business, what you want to do is something called targeted validation. And what targeted validation is this concept where you're looking at where they have the most energy, where they have the most interest, where they've placed their life's work, really. And you want to find a way to validate them. People want to be validated more than they want money, more than they want love, more than they want anything. We don't get validation in so many areas of our life. And so this very simple trick, you could be so much more likable, so much more believable if you validate what people really care about.
Can you give me an example?
So a perfect example would be, Bruce, you're an excellent journalist and you're someone who really follows up and understands money better than pretty much anyone else out there. Your concepts and the way in which you've interviewed hundreds of people on this topic make you a foremost expert.
Thanks, Mom. You're the best. You're the best. Okay, number four, Chip, repeatability. Obviously, Adele has practiced that element a lot. What would you say about repeatability?
So that's your message, quite simply. It's that, is it the kind of message that someone's going to understand after they leave your presence? And that's what you want, right? And again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, Bruce. You know this, but for everybody else, it's the idea here is that you need to make it so concise and easy for people and interesting enough that people are going to want to run and tell the next person. And that's something that Adele has taught me and she's used throughout her career.
I was raised by a crunchy granola mom in the 70s who was all about the active listening. She would sit the five of us down and force us to repeat back what our sibling had said in the context of our fight. You move beyond that paradigm to this thing, Adele, that you referenced, forensic listening. What's the difference?
Yeah, I'm going to let Chip take that one.
All right, Chip.
All right, I'm just going to say it is the next level. So like you actually described, active listening is all about de-escalation, listening in the moment. What we say with forensic listening, it is the analysis of a conversation after it's happened. And because words leave clues. So whenever you're dealing with somebody, if you pay attention to their emotion, if you pay attention to the theme that they're developing, if you pay attention to their body positioning, which is differentiated from body language, and if you pay attention to their voice, their pitch, tone, and cadence, then you're going to get a holistic understanding of what is important to that person after you've heard that conversation, and then go back, revisit it, put down the high notes there, form an idea, like if you would a profile even of that person, and then go back to them 2 weeks later, a month later, and say, you remember that thing when you were talking about the core concept of interviewing and how important it is to get it right? Well, I just want you to know that I implemented 3 of the things that you said right away. And the results have been astounding. Here's how it's affected me and the things I went back with my team about.
And everybody remembers the time that someone did that to them, right? And it's like we probably can count it on our hands in our professional career how many times somebody said, "You really said something brilliant in a meeting," right? I mean, like, and they say it 3 weeks later. It's astounding how incredible you can get more respect in that regard.
Adele, we get in our own way sometimes. We can learn all these things, and then we come to the moment of truth. We're having the conversation, and we just go somewhere that is off the intention of what we're trying to deliver. Sometimes the catalyst for that is fear. How do people manage their own emotions, in particular, fear, in these high stakes conversations?
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna throw that one to Chip. That's you. Sorry.
So in a brief concept, the idea of fear with us, Bruce, is that what we want to do is dial into that other person. This is what I was taught at Quantico for hostage negotiation, because it can be overwhelming, right? If you're thinking about the gun to another person's head, you're no longer in the game. You're no longer in the right frame of mind. All you are thinking about is the possible bad consequences that's going to happen. What I needed to do was dial into that person to such a degree that everything else fell away. So the lights and sirens, the helicopters overhead, the chatter on the radio, all that disappears. And I'm just talking to this individual and focusing on them and their problem to be worked out.
And Bruce, just let me throw this in. Chip, when he was dealing with hostage takers, hostage situations, the people who would leave the situation would be angry at Chip because they were like, "You were so in tune with the hostage taker. What about me?" Like they were angry with him after the fact because
that could happen, right? That could happen if they hear what's going on, right?
Right.
Now, Adele, in terms of the crisis component, what is the single thing that you would pull from this body of work that is the book that you would want people to reapply? Because not everybody is Olivia Pope. Though they wish they could be. Wish they could be.
True. It's true. One of the things I would say that I learned, and I learned this as a result of the interviews that Chip and I did over the course of writing the book, is this idea of providing mitigation. Most of us do not want to provide anyone else mitigation. They made a mistake. They need to apologize. We don't like what they did. We don't like how they've approached us in some way. If you provide other people mitigation, they will be so much more likely to forgive a mistake when you make it. So just mitigating situations, offering people an opportunity to save face many times can stop a crisis right where it starts, but a lot of times executives don't want to do it. Like that's one of the hardest things for executives to accept. You know, you see this with the recent Boeing crisis, right? I mean, they just would not accept, you know, responsibility for what happened. They kept pushing it forward, making it more of a legal liability than a PR image reputation issue where people are getting in their planes. Like, how are they not addressing the issue? But they kept making it legal first approach. And that's
how do you determine when to stop? Because you're not going to convince everybody about everything all the time. I'm sure readers of your book will take their stats from, I don't know, 20% to 30%, but no one's 100% all the time. If they're 100%, they aren't, the bar is not high enough. Their standards are not high enough. How do you know when to stop?
When to stop being convincing, what I would say is a great example we have in this book is this idea about the convincing continuum. And the convincing continuum is this idea where you start with your strongest point. You don't start with your strongest point first. You start with your point of agreement. Then you move them down the continuum and you start talking about things that include FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So you have an idea that you want to present someone. Well, they probably have some fears that they don't know as much as you do. They probably have some uncertainty that they don't know as much as you do. And they have some doubts. And so what you have to do is present them in a variety of different ways. Then you're moving them down the continuum, right? But at some point, you have got to stop because you're unfreezing their cognitive biases. If you take it too far, you wind up going to their latitude of rejection. And then the person's like, I don't believe anything you say. You sound counter to what I believe. And therefore, I'm not going to believe the rest of anything you have to say about this topic. So what you have to do is you have to have the discipline to stop after you've presented, you know, the point of agreement, after you've presented your FUD. You've got to give them something where they go and research it themselves so they can convince themselves about what it is you're trying to present. But most of us do not have the discipline to stop. You see this with political campaigns, you see it with, advertising campaigns. They go too far. Some of that's intentional. But if you want to be super convincing, you have to stop.
I feel seen. I feel seen. It is very difficult for me sometimes, not so much to stop, but just to shut my mouth. But I'm going to shut my mouth right now. But before I do, thank you. Thank you for joining us today to talk about Convince Me. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Chip Massey and Adele Gambardella are the co-authors of Convince Me, High Stakes Negotiation Tactics to Get Results in Any Business Situation.